We had in the Soviet Union the new political thinking, which was really genuinely attempt to say, look, the Western powers, according to Marxist-Leninist dogma, were inevitably militaristic and violent, aggressive, imperialistic. And Mikhail Sergeyevich Gorbachev, during Perestroika in the late 1980s, said, we don't need this Cold War. Remember what Georgy Arbatov said to the Washington, we're going to do something terrible to you. We're going to remove the image of the enemy. So this Gorbachevian vision, I mean, we talk about naivety, of course, there were failings in all of that. His view wasn't just his personal view, it was a Soviet system had matured that this ideological conflict would no longer need to take these, this bloc-type politics facing each other. His famous speech, and this is why I go on about the United Nations, in December 1988, which effectively put an end to the Cold War. When he put an end to the Cold War, Gorbachev, it was not a capitulation to the West. The commitment was, we don't need this Cold War. Let's work together within the United Nations. That is the agenda, ultimately, which is perhaps a pathway today out from this present conflict. Not naivety, but a systemic vision of how to move beyond it.
I wouldn't say naive, but it's a bit idealistic representation of situation, because the peaceful coexistence has derived from the thing that the Soviet Union, of course, was very slow in development economically. And it was losing terrain to the United States and Western world, and it was more and more understandable. 88, 89, I was part of the Russian negotiations team in START and INF treaties. 90% of industry was working for war, and only 10% was producing things for people, for civilians,
the consumer
and everything.
economy.
Of course, yes. The gap in this technological and economical development was wider and wider. And I do believe that the main driving factor for Gorbachev to make these concessions concerning withdrawal of forces from Germany, of course, necessity of disarmament, and even peaceful coexistence theory, it was due to these factors. Initially, in early 60s, of course, we were very quick in developing space, orbital things, nuclear things, lots advancing. But then, unfortunately, the socialist system as such, it didn't manage the competition with the capitalist system in the West. And it was more clear and clear this disadvantage could lead us to disaster. When Reagan has proclaimed his Star Wars, and we started to compete on that in pouring all cement factories into deserts and all that stuff, that was inevitable.
The Soviet economy could have survived. I mean, it was limping along, but it wasn't given a chance. It had no time. And of course, then you had the domestic insurgency of Yeltsin, which undermined the Gorbachevian strategy. And of course, the inability and refusal of George Bush Sr. to make any fundamental concessions. You talked before about the Helsinki Final Act. And the problem with all these acts, and the Paris, the November 1990, and of course the Istanbul Declaration 99, Astana 2010, all of them contain within them two ideas: that security has to be indivisible and everything else. And at the same time, they talk about the free choice, the country's ability to have free choice. So there's two models of international politics. So we have this sort of systemic, structural conflict going on all the way through. And how to overcome it is that we will say, well, look, we need to have a reset of international politics to say, look, these ideas are not ultimately incompatible, the Helsinki Final Act, with if we could institutionalize it. And that's been the failure all the way through from 1989, 88 onwards to today. So